What inmates actually eat. Prison food uncovered. The shocking plate. The camera zooms in on a steel tray. Something slimy slides across the surface. A chunk of gray meat, cold beans, and a slice of bread, so hard it could break a tooth. One inmate whispers, "This isn't food. It's punishment." The smell fills the room, like wet cardboard mixed with rotten eggs. A few inmates push their trays away, while others eat in silence because hunger doesn't allow them the luxury to refuse. And here's the most shocking part. Tests later revealed that some meals served inside prisons contain mold, maggots, and expired meat. Food that would never be allowed in the free world was given daily to men and women behind bars. But the bigger question is, how does food this bad even end up on the tray of thousands of inmates every single day? How it all begins. Before the shocking tray of gray meat, the story starts with a deal. Prison kitchens are often run not by the state but by private companies. These companies promise to save money for the government. But saving money means cutting corners, cheaper ingredients, fewer cooks, smaller portions. At first, inmates complained the food was just bad. Meals were small. Vegetables looked frozen, then thawed and reheated. Chicken was more bone than meat. Still, they ate it, because what choice did they have? But the low turned into a high when the prison suddenly switched vendors. For one short month, trays had fresh bread, actual fruit, and hot soup that didn't smell rotten. Inmates felt like they had stepped into another world. And then it all crashed. The new company ran out of money. Overnight, the good food vanished, replaced again with rotten meat and powdered eggs that tasted like chalk. The anger inside the prison boiled. Breaking point. One day, an inmate named Marcus lifted his tray and found a cockroach crawling across his beans. He slammed the tray on the floor. Others stood up shouting, "We're not eating this trash anymore." Guards rushed in. The cafeteria turned into chaos, food trays flying, inmates pounding on tables. This was no longer about hunger. It was about dignity. The extreme event hit. A full-blown food strike. Hundreds of inmates refused to line up at mealtime. They'd rather starve than eat food meant for animals. The food strike. The strike spread like wildfire. Inmates locked inside their cells banged on the bars with metal cups. From one block to another, the sound echoed clang, clang, clang. At first, the guards laughed. "They'll give in once they're hungry enough," one officer muttered. But hours turned into days. Food trays piled up untouched outside cell doors. The less extreme event came when prison officials tried to calm things down. They offered peanut butter sandwiches as a compromise. Some inmates gave in, desperate for calories. Others shouted back, "We're not animals, we want real food." The standoff dragged on. Medical staff grew worried, blood sugar dropping, inmates collapsing in their cells. And then the extreme event hit. One afternoon, smoke began to rise from the kitchen. Furious inmates had set fire to a cart of rotten bread. Alarms screamed. Guards in riot gear stormed the block, spraying tear gas. The strike turned into a full-scale prison disturbance. The cover-up. The riot was crushed within hours, but the fallout was far from over. Inmates were dragged into solitary, their faces red from pepper spray. The smell of burnt bread and smoke lingered in the air for days. The less extreme events came after. Administrators quietly wrote reports that downplayed the incident. Minor disruption, the paperwork read. Cameras that had captured the food strike mysteriously went missing. The official story. Inmates refused meals for a short time due to misunderstanding about menu options. But inside the cells, the truth couldn't be hidden. Inmates whispered to each other through vents. They're trying to bury it. The outrage didn't fade. It grew. And then came the next extreme event. A guard, pressured to stay silent, secretly slipped a journalist photos of the trays. green bologna, slimy beans, and bread covered in mold spots. Within weeks, the story hit the news. The outside world finally saw what inmates had been shouting about all along. The public outrage. The photos hit local TV first. Anchors showed images of trays filled with rotting bread and slimy beans. Viewers at home gasped, "Is this really what inmates are being fed?" At first, the less extreme event unfolded. State officials stepped up to the podium. They promised an investigation. They spoke carefully, trying to calm the storm. "We take these allegations seriously," but behind closed doors, they scrambled to protect contracts worth millions of dollars. Families of inmates protested outside the prison gates, holding signs that read, "Food is a human right," and "Stop feeding trash to our loved ones." For a brief moment, the pressure seemed unstoppable. Then the extreme event struck. During a surprise inspection, health officers opened the prison freezer. Inside, they found boxes of meat 2 years past expiration, crawling with frostbite and decay. This wasn't just bad food, it was criminal neglect. The silent retaliation. The discovery should have changed everything, but inside the prison walls, a darker plan unfolded. The less extreme event came first. Inmates noticed their portions shrinking even more. The little milk they used to get disappeared. Fruit was gone. Hot meals were reduced to cold sandwiches with mystery meat. It was retaliation, subtle but brutal. Guards started mocking inmates during chow time. "Still want to complain? Enjoy your sandwich." Then came the next extreme event. One night, Marcus, the same inmate who started the protest, collapsed in the cafeteria. He had eaten nothing for 2 days. When guards rolled him onto a stretcher, inmates shouted, "This is what happens when you poison us." The cafeteria erupted again, tension boiling to the edge of violence. The breaking news. Word of Marcus's collapse spread beyond the walls. A local journalist aired a story titled, "Prison Food Uncovered, Inmates Sickened by Rotting Meals." The less extreme events followed quickly. Lawyers filed lawsuits, activists demanded change, and the governor faced tough questions during press conferences. Cameras zoomed in, microphones shoved forward. "Governor, are prisoners being poisoned under your watch?" But then the extreme event slammed down like thunder. One inmate, desperate to prove the truth, smuggled out a sample of the prison stew. Lab tests revealed traces of E. coli and salmonella. This wasn't just bad food anymore. It was deadly. The courtroom battles. The lawsuits piled up. Families of sick inmates demanded answers. Civil rights lawyers framed it as cruel and unusual punishment. The less extreme event came first. Hearings opened in cramped courtrooms. Company executives sat stiff in suits, insisting, "We followed all safety protocols." Their lawyers argued that inmates were exaggerating and that isolated cases had been taken out of context. But behind the polished words, the evidence kept stacking. Dozens of reports, hidden memos, and secret emails showed food vendors knew they were delivering expired supplies. They just didn't care, because every dollar saved was profit gained. Then the extreme event hit. Mid-trial, a whistleblower took the stand. A former kitchen worker confessed that he had been ordered to wash mold off bread with bleach before serving it. The courtroom went silent. Reporters' pens froze mid-scribble. The truth was no longer deniable. Inside the prison walls, while the courtroom shook the outside world, inside the prison, inmates felt the aftershocks. The less extreme events started slow. New health inspectors roamed the kitchens. For a brief moment, meals looked better. Actual chicken, fresh rice, even apples. Inmates were stunned. Some even clapped in the cafeteria. But hope didn't last long. Days later, the fresh food was gone, replaced again with mystery stew and stale bread. Inmates realized the change had been a performance for the cameras. And then came the extreme event. Inmates in one block refused their trays and began chanting, "We want justice! We want justice!" Guards tried to silence them, but the chant spread across the prison, echoing from cell to cell. The sound was deafening. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was about survival. The governor's dilemma. Pressure mounted at the very top. The governor, facing re-election, could no longer stay silent. The less extreme event unfolded first. A press conference was called. Cameras flashed as the governor stood at the podium. He announced, "We will review all prison food contracts and hold those responsible accountable." But inside the prison, inmates laughed bitterly. They had heard promises before. Promises didn't fill empty stomachs. Then the extreme event shook the entire system. On live television, another whistleblower revealed a shocking truth. The same food company supplying prisons was also serving meals to public schools. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about inmates. It was about children, too. The scandal exploded nationwide. The national outrage. The whistleblower's revelation spread like wildfire. News outlets ran headlines. Rotten prison food linked to school lunches. The less extreme event came first. Parents flooded school board meetings, demanding to know if their children had been fed the same spoiled meat. Officials scrambled, insisting safety checks were already in place. But the damage was done. TV anchors showed side-by-side images, a prison tray with moldy bread and a school tray with suspiciously similar meat. The public was horrified. And then the extreme event shook the nation. One school in the Midwest reported dozens of children hospitalized after eating contaminated meat traced back to the same supplier. Ambulances lined up outside the schoolyard. What started as a prison scandal had now endangered children. The political storm. The scandal tore through the government. Senators held emergency hearings, grilling company executives under bright lights. The less extreme event played out as tense political theater. Officials exchanged blame, lawyers spoke in circles, and activists filled the back rows, holding signs that read, "Justice for inmates and safe food for all." But it was one testimony that broke the silence. A mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. She described how her 10-year-old son had been hospitalized after eating a school lunch. And then she pointed directly at the executives. "If this food isn't good enough for you, why is it good enough for my child? Or for any human being?" The room fell silent. Cameras zoomed in. The nation was listening. And then came the extreme event. The Justice Department announced an investigation into criminal charges against the food company. For the first time, prison food wasn't just a scandal. It was potentially a federal crime. Back inside the walls, while the outside world raged, inmates waited to see if anything would actually change. The less extreme event started small. Kitchen staff replaced the old pots. New shipments of food arrived, and for the first time in years, hot, fresh meals were served. Trays carried rice, vegetables, and actual pieces of grilled chicken. Inmates cheered, banging trays in celebration. But the joy was short-lived. 2 weeks later, the good food disappeared. The fresh supplies had been a one-time show. Mystery meat and watery stew returned to the menu. Inmates realized the system was still broken. And then the extreme event hit. Late one night, an anonymous note appeared in the prison library. Written in shaky handwriting, it read, "If nothing changes, we will take matters into our own hands." The guards found out the next morning. Fear spread fast. Was this a threat, a plan, a warning of what was to come? The tension builds. The anonymous note spread like wildfire among the cell blocks. Inmates whispered through vents, slid scraps of paper under doors, and passed coded messages during recreation. The less extreme event unfolded first. Guards tightened security. Random searches increased. Meal lines grew slower as officers inspected every tray. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. But hunger has a way of erasing fear. Inmates continued to refuse the worst meals, scraping gray meat into trash cans, banging their cups against the bars. The sound echoed through the prison like a warning drumbeat. Then the extreme event hit. One evening, a group of inmates stormed the kitchen during delivery. Boxes of rotten food were dumped in the hallway, spilling rancid meat onto the floor. Guards rushed in, batons swinging, as inmates shouted, "We won't eat garbage anymore!" The riot sirens wailed through the night. The crackdown. The disturbance triggered an immediate lockdown. The less extreme event began with silence. Lights out early, visits canceled, phones disconnected. The prison went still except for the echo of footsteps in the corridors. Inmates sat in their cells, waiting, unsure of what would happen next. Days dragged on. Meals shrank to bare minimum rations, cold sandwiches, dry cereal, sometimes nothing at all. Guards mocked inmates, complain about the food now. Then came the extreme event. In solitary confinement, Marcus, the inmate who had first sparked the protest months earlier, collapsed again. This time he didn't get back up. Paramedics wheeled him out under a sheet. Inmates shouted through the vents. They killed him with hunger. The prison was about to explode. The breaking point. News of Marcus's death leaked outside within days. Families wept on the prison steps holding signs with his name. Activists demanded accountability. The less extreme event was the slow-building wave of outrage. Talk shows debated prison conditions. Newspapers ran front-page stories, and hashtags spread across social media. Prison food scandal and #justice for Marcus. But inside the prison, grief turned into rage. And then the extreme event struck. At dinner time, entire blocks refused trays. Instead, they pushed the food back at the guards and began chanting in unison, "No more death, no more lies." The cafeteria became a thunder of voices. Guards called for backup. Riot teams gathered outside the doors. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, anger, and rebellion. The story had reached the edge of collapse. The showdown. The cafeteria was a storm. Hundreds of inmates stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices shaking the walls. No more death, no more lies. The less extreme event started with hesitation. Guards formed a line, shields raised, waiting for the order to move in. Warden's voice boomed over the intercom. "Stand down and return to your cells, or force will be used." But no one moved. Inmates stared back, silent now, the silence even scarier than the chant. For a moment it felt like the entire prison was holding its breath. Then the extreme event crashed down. An inmate hurled a tray at the line of guards. In an instant the room exploded. Riot shields slammed forward, tear gas filled the air, and fists flew in every direction. Tables toppled, food splattered across the floor, and the cafeteria became a war zone. The fallout. The riot lasted less than an hour, but its scars would last forever. The less extreme events unfolded in the aftermath. Dozens of inmates were dragged to solitary, beaten, and bloodied. Guards were injured too, some hospitalized, faces swollen from blows. The prison went on full lockdown. The sound of clanging doors echoed through every block. But the truth couldn't be locked away. Word of the riot leaked to the outside again. Activists gathered at the gates, chanting Marcus's name. News helicopters circled above, showing aerial footage of smoke still rising from the prison yard. And then came the extreme event. Federal agents stormed the prison the next morning. Cameras followed them as they carried out boxes of records, contracts, and hard drives. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. This was a federal takeover. The turning tide. With the feds inside, everything changed. The less extreme event started with small reforms. Shipments of real food arrived. Fresh vegetables, packaged milk, hot meals that looked almost edible. Ate cautious, tasted cautiously. For the first time in years, the smell of real food drifted through the cafeteria. Some cried over simple apples and bread rolls that weren't moldy. But the fight wasn't over. The extreme event came during a televised press conference. The U.S. Attorney announced that criminal charges were being filed, not just against the food company, but against prison officials who had knowingly allowed the abuse. Faces of wardens and executives flashed on the screen as indicted. It was no longer just a scandal. It was a reckoning. The resolution. The charges shook the prison system to its core. Executives in suits were paraded in handcuffs, wardens forced to resign, and millions in fines were announced. On the outside, the public cheered. Finally, justice seemed possible. Inside the prison, the less extreme event unfolded quietly. For the first time in years, trays carried real meals, steaming rice, cooked chicken, fresh fruit. Inmates ate in silence, still suspicious, but grateful for a taste of dignity. Some even whispered, "Maybe things will change." But scars don't heal overnight. Many had already gotten sick. Families had already buried loved ones, and the system, built on contracts and money, still loomed overhead. Then came the final extreme event. A reporter asked one inmate what he thought of the new food. The man stared at the tray in front of him and said softly, "It's better now, but only because people are watching. When the cameras leave, so will the fresh food." His words cut deeper than any riot. They were a warning. Change in prisons often lasts only as long as the spotlight does. And that's the haunting truth of prison food. Behind every tray is a story of neglect, profit, and survival. What started as a rotting piece of bread in a prison cafeteria grew into a national scandal, one that reached courtrooms, schools, and the highest levels of government. But it leaves us with a question we can't ignore. If food this bad could poison both inmates and children, what else is being hidden behind these walls? So, what do you think? Was justice served, or was this just another cover-up? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next story might be even darker than this one.